She was 7 when she told the Vampire King she'd be his queen someday. He laughed and gave her a token. 20 years later, he found her in chains, and this time he wasn't letting her go. The smell of burning wood and spilled blood hung thick in the night air. 7-year-old Ara pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the village church, her heart hammering so loud she was certain the monsters outside could hear it. Through the shattered window above her head, she could see orange flames licking at the thatched roofs of homes she'd known her entire life. The screaming had stopped 10 minutes ago. That was somehow worse than when it had been happening. "Stay quiet, little one," her mother whispered, clutching Ara's baby brother to her chest. Around them, 15 other villagers huddled in the darkness, the only survivors of Brennan's raiders, a human mercenary group that had swept through their settlement like a plague. Then came a sound that made even the raiders outside fall silent. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps, heavy, measured, not human. "Oh, gods!" Someone whimpered in the darkness. "The Nightborn are here." Ara had heard stories about vampires, the Nightborn as they called themselves, creatures who ruled the northern territories with an iron fist, who drank blood and lived forever, who could tear a grown man apart with their bare hands. Her grandmother used to say they were punishment for humanity's sins, sent by the old gods to keep mortals humble. The church door exploded inward. A man stepped through the splintered wood, except man wasn't quite right. He was tall, impossibly tall, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the firelight. His hair was black as a raven's wing, pulled back to reveal features so perfect they looked carved from marble. He wore armor of deep crimson and black, with a cloak that moved like living shadow. But it was his eyes that made Ara's breath catch. They were silver, bright as moonlight, and ancient. So ancient. "Vampire King." One of the raiders outside gasped, dropping to his knees. The pale man, the king, tilted his head slightly, studying the kneeling mercenary the way a cat might study a mouse. "You attacked a village under my protection." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Explain." We didn't know, Your Majesty. We thought this was disputed territory. The Vampire King moved. One moment he was standing in the doorway. The next, he was beside the raider. One pale hand wrapped around the man's throat. "You thought wrong." What happened next was over in seconds. The Vampire King moved through the remaining raiders like death itself, faster than eyes could follow. Ara heard screams, saw flashes of crimson, and then silence, complete and total silence. "Come out," the Vampire King called, his voice echoing in the church. "All of you, I will not harm you." No one moved. I said, "Come out." This time, his voice carried a weight that made Ara's bones ache. It wasn't a request. It was a command from something far older and more powerful than she could comprehend. One by one, the survivors stumbled out of the church into the blood-soaked square. Ara's mother tried to hold her back, but Ara pulled free, stepping into the firelight on bare, dirty feet. Her blonde hair was matted with soot, her blue eyes wide but unblinking. The Vampire King stood among the bodies of the raiders, not a drop of blood on his perfect armor. Behind him, a dozen other vampires had materialized from the shadows. His court, his soldiers, his followers. They all wore variations of the same crimson and black. All had the same supernatural beauty, the same predatory stillness. The villagers fell to their knees, trembling. Ara's mother yanked her arm. "Kneel, you foolish girl!" But Ara didn't kneel. She walked forward instead, her small feet leaving prints in the ash-covered ground. She didn't understand why she was doing it, only that she had to. Something about those silver eyes called to her. The vampires in the king's court tensed. One of them, a woman with hair like spilled wine, hissed softly. "The child approaches the king unbidden. Let her come," the king said quietly. Ara stopped 3 feet from him and tilted her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just silver. They had tiny flecks of red in them, like drops of blood in snow. He smelled like winter nights and old books and something else she couldn't name. "You saved us," she said simply. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I did. Why?" Now he did smile, revealing perfect white teeth and just a glimpse of elongated canines. "Because these villages pay tribute to my kingdom, you are mine to protect." Behind her, Ara heard her mother's sharp intake of breath. The other villagers were probably horrified that she was speaking so boldly to a vampire king. But Ara was 7 years old and had just watched her entire world burn. Fear seemed like a distant concept. "What's your name?" she asked. The vampires in the court made various sounds of shock. Apparently, you weren't supposed to ask a vampire king his name. But the king laughed, a real laugh. "Rich and genuine, Lucien," he said, crouching down so they were almost eye to eye. "And yours, little brave one, Ara." She reached up and touched the obsidian clasp on his cloak, a circle with a crown carved into it. "And this is pretty. Get back here," her mother whispered desperately, but Lucien held up one pale hand, silencing her. His silver eyes studied Ara's face with an intensity that should have been frightening. "You have no fear of me." "Should I?" "Most do." Ara thought about that. "You killed the bad men. That makes you good." "I am many things, child. Good is not one of them." He tilted his head, genuinely curious now. "Why do you not kneel?" "Because," Ara said with the absolute certainty that only children possess, "I'm going to be your queen someday. Queens don't kneel." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the vampire court erupted into laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter that echoed off the burning buildings. Even the red-haired woman was smiling, shaking her head in disbelief. But Lucien wasn't laughing. He stared at Ara with those ancient silver eyes, and for just a moment she saw something flicker in them. Surprise, amusement, something else. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and unclasped the obsidian circle from his cloak. He held it out to her on his palm. "A token, then," he said softly, "for a promise." Ara took the pendant, her small fingers closing around the smooth black stone. It was warm, as if it held some of his supernatural heat. "When you are grown," Lucien said, standing to his full height, "if you still wish to be queen, find me. Show me this token. We shall see if a mortal child can keep a promise to an immortal king." He turned to leave, his cloak billowing behind him like wings. "I will," Ara called after him. "I promise." The vampire king paused at the edge of the square and looked back over his shoulder. In the firelight, with smoke curling around him and his court at his back, he looked like something from a dark fairy tale. "We shall see, little one." Then he was gone, melting into the shadows with his followers. Ara's mother rushed forward and grabbed her, checking for injuries, scolding and crying at the same time. But Ara barely heard her. She was staring down at the obsidian pendant in her hand, at the tiny crown carved into its surface. "Someday," she thought, "someday I'll find him again." She had no idea that someday would come 20 years later, in chains. Bare 20 years had changed everything. King Lucien stood on the balcony of his war room, watching the eastern horizon where smoke from burning villages stained the dawn sky. The border conflict with the Theran Empire had dragged on for 3 bloody years. Human kingdoms, emboldened by new weapons and alliances, were pushing back against Nightborn territories for the first time in centuries. "Your Majesty," General Cases entered, his crimson eyes glowing in the dim light. "The spoils caravan from the Theran front has arrived. Commander Vex sends word they've taken significant prisoners this time." Lucien didn't turn from the window. War bored him. He'd fought in hundreds of them across his 4 centuries of existence. They all blurred together eventually. The blood, the politics, the endless cycle of violence. Process them as usual. Anyone with military value goes to interrogation, the rest to labor assignments. There's something else. Cases hesitated, unusual for the battle-hardened general. The commander specifically requested your presence in the courtyard. He said you'd want to see this yourself. Now Lucian turned, one dark eyebrow raised. Vex doesn't make requests like that. No, sire, he doesn't. The palace courtyard was filled with the aftermath of war. 3 dozen prisoners knelt in chains on the cobblestones, guarded by vampire soldiers in black armor. They were dirty, exhausted, and reeking of fear. The usual harvest from enemy territory. Commander Vex, a scarred vampire with white hair, approached and bowed. My king, we raided a Theron supply caravan near the Ashford border. Found these prisoners already in chains. Seems the Empire was moving them to their capital as slaves. And this concerns me how? Lucian asked, his tone cold with disinterest. Vex gestured to the line of prisoners. 3rd row, 5th from the left, the woman with blonde hair. Lucian's silver eyes scanned the group with practiced efficiency, then stopped. His immortal heart, which barely beat more than once per minute, stuttered. She was thin, too thin, with hollow cheeks and bruised skin. Her blonde hair, once golden, was matted and dirty, hanging in tangles around her face. She wore rags that might have once been a dress, and iron shackles bound her wrists and ankles. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Those blue eyes, he remembered, were now empty, staring at nothing, seeing nothing. Around her neck, on a frayed leather cord, hung a familiar obsidian pendant. Ara, he breathed. The name came out before he could stop it. Several of his soldiers glanced at him sharply. Kings didn't use the names of slaves with such familiarity. Lucian descended the steps slowly, his mind racing. 20 years. He'd thought of her occasionally over the decades, a curious memory, a child's bold promise that had amused him for a brief moment. He never expected to see her again, never expected to care if he did. But seeing her like this, broken, chained, barely alive, something twisted in his chest, something he hadn't felt in over a century. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling across her bowed head. She didn't look up. Be this one, he said quietly to Vex. Where was she captured? Their slave camp, sire. She'd been there at least 2 years, according to the records we found. Before that, Vex consulted a blood-stained ledger from the raiders who destroyed her village. Standard war prizes. Her village, the place he'd saved once, he'd failed to save again. Lucien crouched down, ignoring the surprised looks from his soldiers. Look at me. Ara didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, mechanical. She'd learned that stillness kept you alive in captivity. I said, look at me. He let a thread of compulsion enter his voice. Not enough to hurt, just enough to cut through whatever fog she was lost in. Slowly, painfully, she raised her head. Their eyes met. Lucienne searched her face for recognition, for any spark of the fearless child who'd once told him she'd be his queen, but there was nothing. She looked at him the way she'd look at any other vampire lord, with empty acceptance of whatever cruelty was coming next. She didn't know him. Do you remember me? He asked softly. Her cracked lips moved. No, master. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. The word master felt like a blade between his ribs. His hand moved to the pendant at her throat, lifting it gently. The obsidian was worn smooth from years of touch. The carved crown still visible. She'd kept it. Through everything, the raids, the slavery, the horror, she'd kept his token. This, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Do you remember where you got this? Something flickered in her empty eyes. Confusion, maybe. A distant memory trying to surface through layers of trauma. Her fingers moved weakly toward the pendant, touching it like a talisman. A village fire, she whispered. Long ago. A man with silver eyes. Or maybe I dreamed it. Her brow furrowed as if thinking hurt. You didn't dream it. Behind him, Lucian heard his war council approaching, drawn by word that the king was personally inspecting slaves. Lady Morgana, his chief advisor, spoke first. "Your Majesty, is something wrong?" Lucien stood, his decision already made. "This prisoner is to be taken to the royal quarters immediately. She's not to be processed with the others." Silence. Shocked, absolute silence. General Cases stepped forward carefully. "Sire, she's a war prisoner, a slave. The protocol—" "I don't care about protocol." Lucian's voice could have frozen blood. "She goes to the Royal Infirmary, personal guard, the best healers, now. But the other prisoners will—" "Do you question your king, Cases?" The general dropped to one knee immediately. "No, Your Majesty." Lady Morgana's crimson eyes narrowed suspiciously. "My lord, if I may ask, who is she?" Lucian looked down at Ara, who was still staring at the pendant in her shaking fingers, lost in some half-remembered dream. "Someone who made me a promise once," he said quietly, "and I intend to see if she can still keep it." He turned to Commander Vex. "Remove her chains carefully. If anyone harms her, I'll personally tear out their throat." As vampire guards moved to obey, Lucien walked away, his cloak billowing behind him. But his mind was chaos, an unfamiliar sensation for a being who'd mastered his emotions centuries ago. The fearless little girl was gone, replaced by a broken woman who couldn't even remember his face. And for the first time in his long, immortal life, Lucien felt something he'd thought himself incapable of feeling. Guilt. The Royal Infirmary was a place reserved for injured nobles and high-ranking officers, not human slaves. Era woke in a bed so soft she thought she was dying. That's what happened, wasn't it? When you died, everything stopped hurting. She kept her eyes closed, waiting for the pain to return, for the cold stone floor, for the chains. "She's awake," a female voice said, not unkind, but clinical. Ara's eyes snapped open. She was in a room with white marble walls and high-arched windows. Morning sunlight, actual sunlight, streamed through silk curtains. A vampire woman in healer's robes stood beside the bed, her red eyes studying Ara with professional detachment. "Where?" Ara's voice cracked. "The royal wing. You're safe." The healer held up a glass vial filled with dark red liquid. "This is a healing tonic. It contains blood but also herbs for mortals. It will help with the malnutrition and injuries." Ara pressed herself against the headboard. "No, it's not poisoned. If that's your concern, I don't care." Ara's voice was stronger now, hardened by years of survival. "I don't drink anything given by vampires." The healer sighed. "You've been starved, beaten, and gods know what else. Without treatment, you'll die within a month. Then I'll die." Stubborn, the healer set down the vial. "The king said you'd be difficult." At the word king, Ara's hand instinctively went to the pendant at her throat. Still there. "Surprisingly. Why am I here? What does he want?" "I don't question His Majesty's orders. I just follow them." The healer moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, human. I've served in this palace for 70 years. I've never seen the king personally intervene for a prisoner. Whatever you are to him, it's kept you alive. Don't throw that away out of pride." After she left, Ara sat in the too-soft bed, trying to understand the vampire with silver eyes, the king who'd pulled her from the prisoner line. Something about him had felt familiar, like a dream she couldn't quite remember. She looked down at the obsidian pendant, a village fire, a man who saved us. The memory was there, buried under years of trauma, but she couldn't quite reach it. 3 floors below, in the War Council chamber, Lucien faced a different kind of battle. "This is unacceptable." General Cases slammed his fist on the marble table. "You've placed a human slave in the royal wing. Do you understand the message that sends?" "I understand perfectly." Lucien's voice was ice. "I am king. My word is law." Lady Morgana, ever the politician, spoke more carefully. "Your Majesty, no one questions your authority, But the War Council has concerns. The human came from Theron territory. She could be a spy. She's barely conscious, Lucian said flatly, or that's what she wants us to believe. This from Lord Darius, Master of Intelligence. His pale fingers steepled. The Theron Empire is desperate, planting an agent in our very palace, disguised as a pitiful slave. It's precisely the kind of strategy they'd employ. Lucian felt his patience fraying. She's not a spy. How can you be certain? Cases demanded. Because I knew her 20 years ago. The council exchanged glances. Lady Morgana leaned forward, her crimson eyes sharp. Knew her how? Exactly. Lucienne shouldn't have said anything, but the memory was there, bright and persistent. I saved her village from raiders when she was a child. She made an impression. An impression? Darius's thin smile was knowing. My king, surely you don't make strategic decisions based on childhood sentimentality. Watch your tongue, Darius. The intelligence master bowed his head but continued, Forgive me, sire, but we're at war. The Theron Empire has received word that we captured their slave caravan. They're demanding the prisoners return. Specifically, they mentioned a blonde woman with an obsidian pendant. They want her, Your Majesty. Lucian's blood went cold. They mentioned her specifically by description. Yes. Darius slid a parchment across the table. This arrived by Raven this morning. They're calling her a symbol of the resistance, some propaganda nonsense about a human who defied vampire rule. They're offering a substantial prisoner exchange, 20 of our captured soldiers for her alone. Lucian read the letter, his jaw tightening. The Theron Empire wanted Ara badly. Too badly. Why? That's what concerns us. Lady Morgana said quietly. Either she's genuinely valuable to them, which makes her a liability to us, or this is an elaborate trap. I propose we return her, Cases said bluntly. 20 trained soldiers for one broken human. It's a strategic advantage. No, Your Majesty, I said no. Lucien's voice carried the weight of 4 centuries of absolute rule. She stays. General Cases stood, his massive frame vibrating with frustration. Then at least move her to the dungeons. Keep her under guard. You've given a potential enemy agent access to the royal wing. She's no threat to anyone. She's a threat to you! Cases roared, then caught himself, breathing hard, more quietly. Sire, the court is already whispering. They see you showing mercy to a human slave. They question if the king has gone soft. If our enemies believe you're compromised, let them believe what they want. Lady Morgana stood as well, her approach more measured. My lord, I've served you for 90 years. I've never seen you act this way. Please help us understand. Why this human? Why now? Lucian looked at his counsel, loyal, capable, and completely unable to understand. How could he explain that a child's fearless promise had haunted him for 2 decades, that seeing her broken had cracked something in him he thought long dead? She stays in the infirmary, he said finally, under guard if it pleases you, but she will not be harmed, traded, or moved to the dungeons. This discussion is over. He left the council chamber to angry whispers and worried glances. When Lucian entered the infirmary that evening, he found Ara sitting by the window, still wearing the simple white gown the healers had dressed her in. She didn't turn when he entered. You should be resting, he said. I don't take orders from vampires. Her voice was flat, emotionless. You're in my palace. Everyone takes orders from me. Now she did turn, and the look in her blue eyes was pure steel. Then kill me or let me go, but don't pretend this is mercy. Isn't it mercy? She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. I've seen vampire mercy. It looks like chains and blood and darkness. Whatever you want from me, just take it and be done with it. Lucian felt that strange twist in his chest again. I want nothing from you, liar. She stood, swaying slightly from weakness. Vampires always want something. Blood, service, entertainment. Her hand clutched the pendant. I don't know why you took me from that line, but I'm not fooled. This is just a prettier cage. She was right in a way. His palace was a cage, one he built over centuries. Do you truly not remember me? He asked softly. Ara stared at him, and for a moment he saw confusion flicker across her face. I remember silver eyes, fire, but it feels like someone else's memory. It was yours. Then that girl is dead. Ara turned back to the window. Whatever you're looking for in me, you won't find it. She's gone. Lucian should have left, should have listened to his counsel and locked her away. But instead, he heard himself say, We'll see. A week passed. Ara began to heal. The bruises faded. Her strength slowly returned, but she remained a ghost, drifting through the infirmary with empty eyes, speaking only when necessary. The vampire healers whispered that her body was mending, but her soul was still broken. On the 8th day, she asked for permission to walk the palace halls. The guards, under strict orders from the king, allowed it, following at a distance. The Nightborn Palace was a masterpiece of dark beauty, soaring ceilings, columns of black marble veined with silver, and stained glass windows that cast colored shadows across the floors. But what caught Ara's attention was the art. Murals covered entire walls, scenes of battles, coronations, and moments from vampire history. She walked past them mechanically until she reached the East Gallery and stopped dead. The mural stretched 20 feet high, covering the entire wall. It depicted a burning village at night, flames reaching toward a dark sky, bodies scattered across the ground. In the center stood a tall figure in crimson armor, his cloak billowing, silver eyes bright even in paint. Around him, raiders fell like wheat before a scythe, and in the corner, barely visible, a small girl with blonde hair stood watching, clutching something in her hand. Ara's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers moved to the pendant at her neck. Trembling, the obsidian felt warm against her palm like it always did, like it held some kind of life. A token, then for a promise. The memory crashed into her like a wave. Not the foggy half-dream she'd been living in, but crystal clear, sharp enough to cut. 7 years old, barefoot in the ashes, silver eyes looking down at her with something almost like respect. When you are grown, if you still wish to be queen, find me. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. Impressive, isn't it? A voice behind her made her spin. Lucian stood in the gallery entrance, hands clasped behind his back. He'd been watching her, she realized, waiting for this moment. The artist took 3 years to complete it, he continued, walking closer. He wanted to capture every detail of that night. I think he succeeded. Ara's hand tightened on the pendant. This village, this is Ashford Settlement. 20 years ago, his silver eyes met hers, and now she saw it. The same ancient gaze that had looked at her with amusement when she'd been too small and stupid to understand what he truly was. You remember now? You, the word came out like an accusation. You were the one who saved us. 20 years of memories flooded back. The way he'd moved through the raiders like death itself. The way he'd crouched down to speak to her like an equal. The way the obsidian clasp had felt warm in her small hand. I'll be your queen someday. Gods, she'd actually said that, had believed it with her whole heart. Why didn't you come back? The question exploded from her before she could stop it. You saved us once, gave us your protection, and then you left us to die. Her voice rose. Months, years of buried rage, finally breaking free. And 2 years after you saved us, the raiders came again. Different ones this time. They said Ashford was disputed territory, that your protection didn't mean anything. They burned everything, killed everyone who resisted. The rest of us. Her voice cracked. We were sold, passed from one master to another, like cattle. She took a shaking step toward him, her blue eyes blazing with fury. I waited for you. I was 9 years old, and I waited for the Vampire King to save us again, like he did before. But you never came. Your soldiers never came. No one came. She ripped the pendant from her neck, the leather cord snapping. Do you know what they did to us? Do you have any idea what it's like to be... She couldn't finish. The words stuck in her throat, too horrible to speak aloud. Lucian stood completely still, his marble face finally cracking. For the first time since she'd been brought to the palace, she saw genuine emotion in his ancient features. Shock, then understanding, then something that looked almost like pain. Ashford was attacked again. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't pretend you didn't know." "I didn't know." The words came out harsh, raw. Border raids are handled by regional commanders. Unless there's significant threat to vampire holdings, reports don't reach the capital. Disputed territories, especially... He stopped, closing his eyes. "I gave an order after I saved your village. It was to be listed as protected, but if the regional lord marked it as disputed instead, then you failed us." Ara's voice shook. "You gave a 9-year-old girl hope and then abandoned her to hell." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lucian opened his eyes, and for the first time saw something in them that shocked her more than anything else. Genuine regret. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed you." The admission stole her anger, leaving only exhaustion. Ara sank to the floor, still clutching the broken pendant. "Why did you bother saving me this time?" "Guilt." Before Lucian could answer, rapid footsteps echoed in the gallery. General Cases appeared, his scarred face tight with urgency. He stopped short when he saw Ara on the floor, and the king standing over her. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. The War Council needs you immediately." His crimson eyes flicked to Ara with barely concealed disgust. "And perhaps the human should return to her quarters. This conversation seems emotionally compromising." "I'll be there shortly," Lucian said, not looking away from Ara. Cases hesitated, then bowed and left, but not before Ara caught the concern in his expression. Not concern for her, concern about her. About what she was doing to their king. When they were alone again, Lucian crouched down just as he had 20 years ago and gently took the broken pendant from her hands. "I can't undo what happened," he said softly. "I can't give you back those years, but I can give you a choice now." He pressed the pendant back into her palm, his cool fingers lingering for just a moment. "Stay, heal, and when you're strong enough, decide for yourself what you want to do with what's left of your life. What if I want to leave? Then I'll let you go." He stood, his expression unreadable again. "But I don't think you will." "Why not?" For the first time, she saw the hint of a sad smile. "Because that fearless child who promised to be queen, she's not as dead as you think." He left her sitting in front of the mural, staring at the painted image of the girl she used to be. The War Council chamber erupted in chaos. "They're demanding what?" Lord Darius slammed the latest dispatch onto the table, his pale face twisted with rage. General Cases read from the parchment, his voice grim. "The Theron Empire, backed by 3 allied human kingdoms, demands the return of the Ashford survivor, a symbol of human resistance against vampire oppression. They claim she represents hope for enslaved humans across the territories." He looked up. "They've given us 3 days to comply, or they'll launch a full offensive on our eastern border." Lady Morgana shook her head in disbelief. "One human woman is worth an entire military campaign to them." "It's not about the woman," Darius snapped. "It's about propaganda. Somehow word spread that the Vampire King personally rescued a human slave and gave her royal treatment. The human kingdoms are spinning it into a legend. The girl who will unite both races or some such nonsense." Lucian sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled, his expression carved from ice, but inside his mind churned. How had they found out? Who had leaked information from his palace? "This is a disaster," Cases growled. "Our own soldiers are questioning your judgment, Your Majesty. They see you protecting this human while their brothers die on the front lines. Morale is crumbling." "Then strengthen it," Lucian said coldly. "How?" Cases stood, his massive frame vibrating with barely contained fury. By explaining that our king is compromised by a human woman, that he's willing to risk everything for what exactly? Nostalgia. Watch yourself, General. Someone has to say it. Cases slammed his fist on the table. You're thinking with your heart instead of your head. You haven't been the same since she arrived. The council sees it. The court sees it. Even the kitchen servants are whispering that the king has gone soft. Lady Morgana raised a calming hand. What the general means, sire, is that we have a strategic opportunity here. The Theron Empire clearly values this woman. We could use her as leverage, negotiate a favorable peace treaty, recover our captured soldiers, perhaps even gain territory. She's not a bargaining chip, Lucian said quietly. She's exactly a bargaining chip. Darius leaned forward. My king, I've served you for 60 years. I've never questioned your decisions. But this is madness. One human life against thousands of your own people. He's right, a new voice added. Commander Vex entered, still in battle-worn armor. Blood spattered across his breastplate. I just returned from the Eastern Front. We lost 40 soldiers in yesterday's skirmish alone. The humans are fighting harder now. They believe rescue is coming. They believe in her. He spat the word like poison. A symbol of hope is more dangerous than any weapon. Lucien stood slowly, his silver eyes sweeping across his council. These were his most trusted advisors, generals who'd fought beside him for decades. And they were all telling him the same thing. Give her up. The answer is no, he said flatly. Your Majesty, Morgana began. I said no. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. She stays. We'll find another way to handle the Theron offensive. There is no other way, Cases roared. They're mobilizing 50,000 troops. We'd need to pull forces from 3 other borders to mount a defense, leaving us vulnerable everywhere else. And for what? A damaged human who doesn't even want to be here. That last part hit harder than it should have. This council is dismissed, Lucian said coldly. My lord, please, out! The command carried enough vampiric compulsion to make even his generals flinch. One by one, they filed out, their expressions ranging from anger to deep concern. Only Lady Morgana lingered at the door. She's changing you, she said softly, and I don't think you realize how much. Then she was gone, leaving Lucian alone in the chamber. He sank back into his chair, centuries of controlled emotions finally cracking. Cases was right. Morgana was right. He was compromised. The logical choice was obvious. Trade Ara for peace, save thousands of his own people. But every time he thought about handing her over, about watching her dragged back into chains, something inside him rebelled with a violence that terrified him. When had one human woman become more important than his entire kingdom? Outside the council chamber, hidden in an alcove behind a marble column, Ara pressed herself against the cold stone, her heart hammering. She'd come looking for Lucian to return the repaired pendant. A servant had fixed the broken cord. Instead, she'd heard everything. 50,000 troops, thousands of vampire soldiers dying, all because of me. The weight of it crushed her chest, made it hard to breathe. She'd spent 2 weeks in the palace now. Her body had healed, and with physical health came clarity. She'd started to remember not just who she was, but who she'd wanted to be. That fearless child who'd looked at a vampire king and seen not a monster but a savior. But that was a fantasy, a child's dream. The reality was she was a symbol of war, a weapon both sides wanted to use, and Lucien, stubborn, foolish Lucien, was going to let his kingdom burn rather than admit the truth. She was poison to him, to all of them. Ara waited until the halls were clear, then slipped back toward her quarters. The guards had grown lax over the past week. She was healing, compliant, no longer a flight risk. They had no idea she'd been watching, learning, planning. The palace had servant entrances, supply carts that went to the city every morning, walls that, while high, weren't impossible to scale for someone desperate enough. In her room, Ara pulled out the simple travel clothes a sympathetic servant had brought her: leather pants, a sturdy tunic, boots. She hid them under her bed, along with a small bag of food she'd been stealing from meal trays. That night, she stood at her window looking out at the city below. Lights flickered in the darkness like stars. Somewhere beyond those walls was freedom, a life that didn't cost thousands of lives. The pendant hung around her neck, warm against her skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room, to the memory of that silvery king who tried to save her twice. "But I can't be the reason your kingdom falls." She'd learned long ago that sometimes survival meant running, and sometimes sacrifice meant leaving. Tomorrow, before dawn, she would disappear. Let the Theron Empire waste their resources, searching for a symbol that no longer existed. Let Lucien's council breathe easier without the liability of a human woman clouding their king's judgment. Let Lucien forget the foolish promise a child made 20 years ago. Ara lay down in her too-soft bed and stared at the ceiling, memorizing the feeling of safety, because tomorrow she'd return to what she knew best, the cold, hard world where she belonged. In his chambers, Lucien stood on his balcony, watching the same distant lights, feeling the weight of 4 centuries pressing down on him. He didn't know that by morning Ara would be gone, and he didn't know that her disappearance would finally show him just how much he'd been lying to himself about what she meant to him. 3 miles beyond the palace walls before they found her. She'd slipped out during the pre-dawn servant rotation, hidden in a laundry cart like something from a bad fairy tale. The city streets were just waking up, human merchants setting up stalls, vampire guards changing shifts. She'd kept her head down, moving quickly toward the eastern gate. Freedom was so close she could taste it. Then a hand clamped over her mouth and everything went black. She woke in a moving wagon, her hands bound with iron chains that burned her wrists. 4 men surrounded her, human soldiers in Theron colors, their faces hard with purpose. "She's awake," one of them said. "Inform the captain." The wagon stopped. A 5th man climbed in, older, with grey streaking his beard and cold calculation in his eyes. He studied Ara like she was a piece on a game board. "The Ashford survivor," he said almost reverently. "Do you know how long we've been searching for you?" Ara's throat was dry, but she forced out words. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play stupid. We have informants in the palace. We know the Vampire King took you from the prisoner line, gave you royal treatment, kept you despite our demands." He leaned closer. "You're worth more than gold to us, girl. A human who caught the attention of the Night King himself. The people will rally around you, your hope made flesh." "I'm nobody," Ara said desperately. "Just let me go. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." The captain smiled. "That's not how this works. You're coming to the Theron capital. We'll clean you up, give you pretty dresses, parade you through the streets. The girl who survived vampire slavery and escaped their king." He stood. "By the time we're done with you, you'll be the spark that burns their entire kingdom to ash." Terror clawed at Ara's chest. "No, no, I won't." "You don't have a choice." The wagon lurched forward, heading east toward enemy territory. Ara pulled at her chains, but they held firm. She'd escaped one cage, only to fall into another. Worse, because this time she wasn't just a prisoner. She was a weapon. Lucien knew something was wrong the moment he woke. It was a feeling in his bones, an ancient instinct that had kept him alive for 4 centuries. He dressed quickly and went straight to Ara's quarters. The room was empty, bed made, window open. The pendant he'd repaired for her sat on the pillow, the only thing she'd left behind. For a moment, Lucien just stood there, staring at the obsidian circle with its carved crown. Then something inside him cracked, and cold fury flooded through him like ice water. "Cases!" His roar shook the palace walls. The general appeared within seconds, took one look at the empty room, and his face went pale. "Ara, when?" "Sometime before dawn. Find her now." Within minutes, the entire palace was mobilized. Guards questioned servants. Trackers searched the grounds. Informants were deployed throughout the city. But it was Commander Vex who brought the worst news. "We found the laundry cart she used to escape. But there's more." His scarred face was grim. "There was a struggle near the Eastern District. Witnesses report a blonde woman being forced into a Theron military wagon. They left through the merchant gate an hour ago." "Heading where?" Lucian's voice was deadly quiet. "East, toward the Ashford border. They're taking her back to Theron territory." Lady Morgana, who'd rushed to the war room, spoke carefully. "My lord, if they have her, perhaps we should negotiate." "No negotiation." Lucien was already moving, striding toward his armory. "Ready my horse and a strike team." "A strike team?" Cases followed him. "Sire, this requires a full military response. We should mobilize 3 battalions." "Too slow." Lucien threw open his armory doors, pulling down his battle armor, black steel etched with silver, armor he hadn't worn in 50 years. "They have an hour's head start. By the time we mobilize battalions, she'll be in the Theron capital. Then we've lost her." "Then we've lost her," Morgana said quietly. Lucien turned, and the look in his silver eyes made even his ancient advisors step back. "I haven't lost anything yet." "You can't be serious," Cases breathed. "You're going to chase them yourself with whoever is fast enough to keep up." "This is madness. You're the king. You don't personally rescue prisoners." "She's not a prisoner." Lucien buckled his sword belt, the blade singing as he drew it slightly, testing the edge. "She's mine, and I'm bringing her home." 20 minutes later, Lucien rode out of the palace gates with 30 of his fastest vampire warriors. They moved like shadows, pushing their horses to supernatural speeds, racing the rising sun. Cases watched them go, shaking his head in disbelief. "He's gone mad." "No," Morgana said softly, watching the dust cloud disappear over the horizon. "He's in love, which might be worse." They caught up to the Theron convoy 2 hours later, just as it crossed into contested territory. What happened next would be whispered about in taverns and war camps for years to come. The Vampire King descended on them like a storm given form. He didn't wait for strategy or formations. He simply attacked, a blur of black armor and silver fury, his sword singing through the air. The Theron soldiers never stood a chance. Lucien moved through them with 4 centuries of combat mastery, every movement precise and lethal. Arrows shattered against his armor. Blades broke on his guard. Men who'd faced down armies turned and ran from the sheer supernatural terror of him. His warriors followed in his wake, but they were nearly unnecessary. This wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Inside the wagon, Ara heard the screams, felt the vehicle rock as bodies hit the ground. Then the door was torn off its hinges. Lucien stood in the opening, backlit by the setting sun, covered in blood that wasn't his own. His silver eyes found hers, and the raw emotion in them stole her breath. Relief, fury, fear, and something else she couldn't name. "You ran," he said, his voice rough. "I was trying to save your kingdom," she whispered. "My kingdom." He climbed into the wagon, gently breaking her chains with his bare hands like they were paper. "And you thought leaving would save my kingdom? They were going to war regardless." He cupped her face, his cool hands trembling slightly. "But you are willing to sacrifice yourself to protect people who've done nothing but hurt you." Tears burned Ara's eyes. "I heard the council. I heard what they said. I'm poison to you." "No." His forehead touched hers, and for the first time she felt the full weight of what he'd been holding back. "You're the only thing that's made me feel alive in 200 years. Outside, his warriors were finishing off the last of the Theron soldiers. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. A vampire king and a human woman. Finally admitting what they'd both been running from. "Come home." Lucian said softly. Please. Ara looked into those silver eyes and saw what she'd been too broken to see before. Not a monster. Not a king. Just a man who'd torn through an army to bring her back. Okay, she whispered. I'll come home. The palace erupted in whispers when Lucian returned with Ara. He didn't take her back to the infirmary. Instead, he escorted her personally to the West Wing, quarters reserved for honored guests and visiting nobles. The message was clear. She was no longer a prisoner to be monitored. She was under the king's personal protection. The court didn't know what to make of it. Neither do I, Lucien said, lingering at her doorway. Blood still stained his armor, evidence of the violence he'd unleashed to bring her back. We'll talk tomorrow. But Ara caught his arm before he could leave. Why did you come for me yourself? You could have sent soldiers. His silver eyes met hers. Because losing you wasn't acceptable. The weight of those words settled between them. Then he was gone, leaving Ara alone in rooms 3 times the size of her previous quarters, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't ready to answer. The next morning, Lady Morgana arrived with an unexpected proposal. The king has requested that you be given training, she said, her crimson eyes assessing Ara with new interest. Combat training specifically, with the Queen's Guard. Ara blinked. The Queen's Guard. But there is no queen. Not yet. Morgana's smile was knowing. But the Guard remains an elite unit of female warriors, both vampire and human, who traditionally protect the royal consort. His Majesty believes you should learn to protect yourself. I already know how to survive. Survival and strength are different things, child. Morgana moved to the window, her ancient gaze distant. You've spent years being acted upon, captured, enslaved, rescued. The king is offering you a chance to become someone who acts. The question is, are you brave enough to try? Something sparked in Ara's chest. Something that felt like the fearless child she used to be, waking up after a long sleep. When do I start? The training grounds were brutal. Captain Sarah, a vampire warrior with scars crossing her dark skin, showed no mercy. You're weak, she announced on the first day, circling Ara like a predator. Malnourished, traumatized, and soft. But the king sees something in you, so we'll see if he's right. Ara was knocked down 17 times that first session. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned. Every old injury protested, but she got back up every single time. By the end of the week, she was only knocked down 12 times. By the end of the month, she was knocking others down. Something changed in Ara during those brutal training sessions. Every time she picked herself up from the dirt, she felt pieces of her old self returning. Not the broken slave who'd arrived in chains, and not quite the innocent child from before. Something new, stronger. The other trainees, 5 human women and 3 vampires, watched her with growing respect. She never complained, never quit, never asked for special treatment, despite being the king's whatever she was. You fight like someone with nothing to lose, Sarah commented one afternoon, after Ara managed to disarm a vampire trainee twice her size. I've already lost everything, she replied, breathing hard. Now I'm taking it back. Word of her transformation spread through the palace. The same courtiers who'd laughed at her now watched with fascination as she walked the halls, no longer hunched and fearful, but straight-backed and purposeful. Human servants began to meet her eyes, seeing someone who'd survived the worst and emerged stronger. Even the vampire nobility took notice. She carries herself like a warrior now, Lord Darius observed during a council meeting. Quite the change from the broken thing we pulled from the slave caravan. Lucian, who had been watching Ara's progress from a distance, felt a strange pride. She was always a warrior. She just needed to remember. Then came the day that changed everything. A border dispute erupted between 2 noble houses, 1 vampire, 1 human, over territory rights. The vampire lord wanted to seize human farmland, claiming ancient rights. The human lord refused, threatening rebellion. Traditionally, such disputes were settled by the king's decree, but Lucien, testing an instinct he didn't fully understand, invited Ara to sit in on the council session. The room fell silent when she entered. She wore simple clothes, leather training gear, her blonde hair tied back. But she walked with a confidence that made nobles twice her age straighten in their seats. She took the empty chair beside Lucien's throne without hesitation. General Case's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty, this is a closed council." "I've opened it," Lucien said simply. "Continue with the dispute." The vampire lord, a pompous elder named Silas, presented his case first. "These lands belong to my house for 3 centuries. The humans are merely tenants. I have every right." "You have no right to starve people!" Ara's voice cut through the chamber. Silas turned, outraged. "Excuse me, who are you to—" "Someone who's seen what happens when vampires abuse their power." Ara stood, and every eye in the room fixed on her. "You want that farmland because it's profitable, not because you need it. Those human families have worked that soil for generations. They've paid their taxes, kept the peace, caused no trouble, and you want to take it because you can." "This is outrageous," Silas sputtered. "Your Majesty, you can't allow a human to speak to me this way." But Lucien was leaning forward, fascinated. "Let her finish." Ara turned to the human lord. "And you, threatening rebellion over land? You know what that means? Death. Your people suffering more than they already are." She looked between both nobles. "Neither of you actually cares about the land. You care about winning." The room was silent. "So here's what's fair," she continued. "The vampire lord pays the human families for their land at market value. Triple the rate, considering you're displacing them. The human lord uses that money to develop new farmland on the disputed territory to the south. Both sides profit. No one dies." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lord Darius laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. "She's not wrong." Silas opened his mouth to protest, but other council members were nodding. The solution was practical, fair, and most importantly, it prevented conflict. Lucien looked at Ara with something that might have been wonder. "The lady has spoken. I agree with her assessment. Lord Silas, you'll pay triple rate. Lord Brennan, you'll have rights to the Southern Territory. This matter is settled." Both nobles left looking dissatisfied, which meant the solution was probably fair. After the council dismissed, Cases approached Lucien. "That was unexpected, Your Majesty." "She has good instincts," Lucien said quietly, watching Ara speak with Lady Morgana across the room. "She is more than that." Case's voice was grudging, but honest. "She has natural authority." The nobles respected her, even Silas, and the way she commanded that room. He shook his head. "I've seen generals with less presence." Over the following weeks, Lucien invited Ara to more councils. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. She asked questions that cut through political posturing, proposed solutions that balanced human and vampire needs, and showed a diplomatic instinct that shocked even Morgana. The court that had once whispered about the king's madness began to whisper something else. She's not just a survivor, she's a leader. And late at night, when Lucien stood on his balcony watching the city lights, he realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. The child who'd promised to be his queen was finally becoming her. 3 months after Ara's rescue, the war finally ended. The Theron Empire, weakened by internal conflicts and drained by 3 years of fighting, sued for peace. The treaty negotiations took weeks, but Lucien insisted on terms that protected human territories as much as vampire interests. His council noticed the change. The king, who'd once ruled with cold logic, now considered the human cost of every decision. They knew exactly who'd influenced that change. The peace ceremony was set for the autumn equinox in the Grand Hall, where vampire kings had been crowned for 1,000 years. Representatives from every major kingdom, both human and nightborn, would attend. It was meant to symbolize a new era of cooperation. What no one expected was what Lucian planned to do. The morning of the ceremony, Ara stood in her chambers, staring at the dress that had been delivered at dawn. It wasn't the simple gown she'd grown used to wearing. This was something else entirely. Deep, midnight blue silk that shimmered like starlight with silver embroidery that matched the pattern on Lucien's royal armor. "He's really doing this," she whispered to her reflection. Lady Morgana, who'd come to help her prepare, smiled knowingly. "Did you think he wouldn't? You've sat at his council table for 2 months. You've helped negotiate peace treaties. The court already treats you like royalty. He's simply making it official." "But I'm human. The nobles will never accept—" "The nobles already accept you." Morgana began working on Ara's hair, weaving it into an intricate braid. "You've earned their respect through actions, not bloodline. That's more than most queens can say." Ara's fingers found the obsidian pendant at her throat. "Always there, always warm." "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the weight of it." Morgana's crimson eyes met hers in the mirror. "But I've lived 400 years, child, and I've never seen anyone more suited to stand beside that stubborn king." The grand hall was packed with nobles, diplomats, and dignitaries. Vampires in elegant dark clothing mingled with humans in their ceremonial best. The war might be over, but the tension between races still simmered beneath the surface. Lucien stood at the front in his formal regalia, black and crimson armor polished to a mirror shine, the crown of the Nightborn kingdom resting on his dark hair. His silver eyes swept the crowd with regal authority. "We gather today to mark the end of war," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. 3 years of bloodshed, thousands lost on both sides. And for what? Territory, pride, ancient grudges. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "And no more," Lucien continued. "This peace treaty represents something new, a future where human and vampire can coexist, not as master and subject, but as equals sharing this realm." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, some approving, others skeptical. "But peace requires more than treaties," Lucien said. "It requires symbols, bridges between our peoples. And so today, I don't just celebrate peace." He paused, and for the first time, emotion cracked his controlled expression. "Today, I fulfill a promise made 20 years ago." He gestured to the side entrance. The doors opened, and Ara walked in. The crowd fell silent. She moved with the grace she'd learned from combat training, her head high, her blue eyes steady. The dress flowed around her like liquid night. But it was her presence that commanded attention, the quiet strength of someone who'd survived hell and emerged unbroken. She walked the length of the hall until she stood before Lucien. 20 years ago," Lucien said, his voice softer now, but still carrying. "A little girl stood in the ashes of her burning village and told me she would be my queen someday." A hint of a smile touched his lips. My court laughed. I should have laughed, but I didn't, because even then I saw something in her. Courage, strength, a spirit that refused to bow. He took Ara's hands in his. "I lost track of her over the years, failed to protect her when she needed it most, but fate brought her back to me in chains, broken, barely alive." His silver eyes glistened, and I watched her heal, watched her train, watched her stand before my council and speak truth that nobles twice her age couldn't see. I watched her become exactly what she promised she'd be. From behind the throne, General Cases brought forward a second crown, delicate silver work to look like interwoven vines with small obsidian stones, set like dark stars. Lucien lifted it, holding it above Ara's head. "Some will say this is madness, a vampire king taking a human queen. But you are no ordinary human, Ara. You are a survivor, a warrior, a leader, and you are mine if you'll have me." Tears slipped down Ara's cheeks. "You know I will." "Then I crown you not just as queen," Lucien said, lowering the crown onto her golden hair, but as the bridge between our peoples, the symbol that our races can not just coexist, but thrive together. The crown settled, and something shifted in the hall, like the world itself was holding its breath. Lucien's voice rang out, a promise made in the ashes, fulfilled in the light. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then General Cases, stubborn, skeptical Cases, dropped to one knee. "My queen." Lady Morgana followed, then Commander Vex, then the entire vampire court, one by one, until every Nightborn in the hall was kneeling. The human diplomats looked at each other, then they too began to bow, some reluctantly, others with genuine hope in their eyes. The court that had laughed at a little girl's promise now knelt before the woman she'd become. Lucien took Ara's hand and raised it high, and the hall erupted in cheers, vampire and human voices mingling together in a sound that hadn't been heard in centuries. That night, standing on the royal balcony overlooking the city, Ara leaned against Lucien's shoulder. Below them, celebrations filled the streets. Humans and vampires dancing together, toasting peace, daring to hope for a better future. "No regrets?" Lucien asked softly. Ara touched the obsidian pendant, now joined by a crown. "Not a single one, even though being queen means endless council meetings and diplomatic dinners," she laughed. "I've survived worse." Lucien's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. "That you have, my brave little queen." And as the city celebrated below and stars wheeled overhead, two souls, separated by species and scarred by time, finally found what they'd been searching for. Not a kingdom, not power, but each other.